Hey heroes, and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we delved into the origins and early history of the Thunderbolts, a team initially composed of villains that were posing as heroes. Over the years, however, there have been many different incarnations of the Thunderbolts whose members and goals were often different depending on who assembled the team and why. And so this week, rather than get into any specific exploits or adventures, we're going to give a more abridged overview of the various Thunderbolts teams and their rosters. Now, some of you will already know that the first version of the group was founded by the notorious Nazi supervillain Baron Helmut Zemo, and primarily composed of his Masters of Evil. Passing themselves off as new superheroes so they could work towards obtaining governmental clearances as part of a plot to conquer the world, the villains concealed their true identities and adopted new code names and costumes. The Fixer became Techno, the Beetle became Mach 1, Screaming Mimi became Songbird, the villainous Goliath became Atlas, and Moonstone became Meteorite. Zemo himself, meanwhile, usurped a code name from one of his father's old enemies to become Citizen V. Before long, that team was also joined by a young hero known as Jolt, who was initially unaware of their true motives. In the end, their schemes were exposed, however most of the team decided that they liked being heroes and turned against Zemo, with only Techno staying loyal to him in the end. Seeing potential in the Thunderbolts, the avenging archer Hawkeye, once a criminal himself, offered to join the team as their new leader, granting them a measure of legitimacy. One might consider this the second incarnation of the team, but it was very much a continuation of the first, with much of the same roster, including Jolt, Moonstone, Atlas, and Songbird. Mach 1 was forced to spend some time in prison since he was wanted for murder, but Hawkeye eventually cut a deal with the Commission on Superhuman Activities, or CSA, that allowed him to rejoin as Mach 2, which would not be the last time that he upgraded his armor and increased the number in his codename. That version of the team was also joined by a troubled youth known as Charcoal the Burning Man, and were sometimes aided by the Ogre, a former member of the defunct criminal organization Factor 3. However, after uncovering a conspiracy involving CSA agent Henry Peter Gyrick, most of the Thunderbolts were granted pardons for their previous crimes, provided they never again used their powers or costumes in public. Jolt and Charcoal, on the other hand, were minors with no legal guardians at the time, and so they were made wards of the state and forced to join the CSA's Thunderbolts-inspired team, the Redeemers, who were briefly mentored by Captain America. That group also included new versions of the Smuggler, the Beetle, and Meteorite, as well as the Fixer, who abandoned the codename Techno, a sonic entity known as Scream, and a new Citizen V, whose body was ironically possessed by the mind of Baron Zemo. In any event, most of the Redeemers, including Charcoal, were seemingly killed in a battle with the gravity-manipulating supervillain Graviton. However, Citizen V, the Fixer, and Jolt survived and ultimately joined forces with their erstwhile allies, Songbird, Mach 3, and Atlas, effectively reassembling the original Thunderbolts to defeat Graviton. Also at the time, Atlas's ionic energy form was inhabiting the body of a woman named Dallas Riordan. It was a whole thing, we're not going to get into it right now. Anyway, in the wake of that battle, Jolt, Moonstone, Mach 3, Atlas, and the Fixer were all transported to a disaster-ravaged parallel world known as Counter-Earth. For those who are keeping track of these things, that was the Counter-Earth that was originally created by Franklin Richards, not the one that was made by the High Evolutionary. Having been separated from the body of Citizen V in the midst of all of this, the disembodied mind of Baron Zemo followed the Thunderbolts to Counter-Earth, where he effectively regained his own physical form by seizing control of his unscarred counterpart there. Stranded on Counter-Earth, Zemo took advantage of the situation by convincing the Thunderbolts to follow him again, and while their alliance was an uneasy one, the team embarked on a plan to bring order and prosperity back to Counter-Earth, making their headquarters in the floating city of Atalan. Back on the original Earth, Hawkeye and Songbird embarked on a secret S.H.I.E.L.D. mission to find the last will and testament of the deceased criminal industrialist Justin Hammer. In that quest, they recruited an unlikely ally in the form of the supervillain Plant Man. As it turns out, Hammer had infected numerous supervillains that he'd employed over the years with a deadly but dormant biotoxin, and his daughter, Justine Hammer, known at the time as the Crimson Cowl, sought to gain control over the toxin's activation, giving her life-threatening leverage over all of her father's old operatives. In her attempt to accomplish this, she employed her own version of the Masters of Evil. However, several members of that group defected to Hawkeye's side, forming a new incarnation of the Thunderbolts. This version of the team included Harrier, formerly known as Cardinal, who wore an armored flying suit, Skane, originally Gypsy Moth, who could telekinetically manipulate fabrics and fibers in clothing, Amazon, otherwise known as Man-Killer, who possessed superhuman strength and durability, Cyclone, whose battlesuit gave him the ability to generate high-velocity winds, although he was later taken into S.H.I.E.L.D. custody for abandoning the team, and of course the aforementioned Plant Man, who could mentally animate and manipulate plant life and changed his name to Black Heath during this time. Now, Hawkeye's and Zemo's Thunderbolts teams later joined forces to save both planets from an all-consuming void, after which they all returned to the original Earth, with the exception of Jolt, who remained on Counter-Earth as a member of that world's young allies. And in the wake of that conflict, the Thunderbolts underwent another notable status quo change. Moonstone and Zemo convinced Hawkeye that they were reformed, and while he was skeptical about letting Zemo go free, Hawkeye ultimately decided to give him an opportunity to prove himself, leaving the Thunderbolts under his leadership. Now, Skane and Amazon both left, ultimately falling back into their criminal ways, with the latter switching her codename back to Man-Killer. Mach 3 and Harrier, having genuinely reformed, both turned themselves over to the authorities to serve out the remainder of their previous prison sentences. Atlas's ionic energy form was separated from the body of Dallas Riordan, their merger leaving her with increased strength and reflexes, and she subsequently took the codename Vantage. And so all of this resulted in a new Thunderbolts team led by Baron Zemo and consisting of Blackheath, Songbird, Moonstone, Fixer, Atlas, and Vantage. Of course, Zemo was still plotting world domination, claiming that the only way to save the planet was to rule it. That version of the Thunderbolts soon recruited an armored villain known as Cobalt Man onto their roster. However, that was actually Iron Man in disguise, who infiltrated the team as a double agent. At the same time, Songbird was secretly keeping the Avengers updated on what Zemo was up to, and so suffice it to say his schemes for global domination were once again thwarted, and that incarnation of the Thunderbolts was disbanded. Although disfigured in the conflict, Zemo himself escaped, absconding with the alien gems that empowered Moonstone. Sometime later, after being paroled and released from prison, Mach 3 became Mach 4 and established a new Thunderbolts team, which included his old allies, Songbird and Atlas, along with plenty of new faces. This version of the team included Donnie Gill, aka Blizzard, who had freeze rays built into his costume, Speed Demon, who could run at supersonic velocities, Joystick, who possessed superhuman agility and reflexes, and the Radioactive Man, who, as the name implies, could generate and manipulate various forms of radioactivity. Now, to finance this team, Mach 4 made a deal with the notorious Nazi war criminal and Hydra leader Baron Strucker, fully prepared to oppose him when the time inevitably came to do so. In one of their first outings, this team was aided by Genis Vell, the son of the alien hero Captain Mar-Vell. However, Atlas's ionic powers had begun to affect his mind, making him more violent and irritable, and he seemingly beat Genis Vell to death. While all of that was going on, Baron Zemo was using the Moon Gems to get glimpses into possible future timelines and learned that Genis was destined to end the universe. Knowing that the alien hero had returned from death before, Zemo attempted to prevent the destruction he would cause by actually aiding in his regeneration, altering him in the process. However, in doing so, he inadvertently linked Genis Vell to Big Bang energy from the beginning and end of time, ironically creating the very anomaly that he'd hoped to prevent. Rendered temporarily amnesiac soon after his revival, Genis helped stop a nuclear catastrophe during the Thunderbolts' inevitable battle with Baron Strucker, and subsequently joined the team, taking the codename Photon. Meanwhile, Zemo was also secretly meeting with Songbird and convinced her to aid him in his plans to save the universe from annihilation. Also, something of a romantic situation started happening between them, but we don't exactly have time to get into the nitty-gritty when it comes to the various interpersonal relationships among the Thunderbolts, because trust me, there's a lot. In any event, suffice it to say there were more agendas and alliances going on behind the scenes, including Zemo using the Purple Man, Zebediah Kilgrave, to mentally manipulate Baron Strucker's mutant son Andreas into becoming the swashbuckling swordsman, and ultimately engineering a situation in which Mach 4 was injured and forced to step down from active duty, allowing Songbird to replace him as leader of the Thunderbolts. Under her command, both Blizzard and Speed Demon were ousted from the team, and she subsequently recruited another former villain-turned-hero, Nighthawk. Zemo, meanwhile, came to the conclusion that the only way to save the universe was to kill Genis Vell, and assembled his own new Thunderbolts team, which ultimately included Blackout, Mach 4, the Fixer, Mankiller, Blizzard, the Smuggler, and Moonstone, who was catatonic but being puppeted by Zemo at the time. Aided by the swordsman who sought vengeance on Zemo for his machinations, Songbird's Thunderbolts fought to save their teammate, but in the end Zemo succeeded in using the Moon Gems in conjunction with Blackout's Dark Force powers to rip Photon's bodies into various pockets of time and scattering them across the Dark Force dimension, thereby eliminating the anomaly that threatened the universe. After that, having actually saved the world, Zemo succeeded in uniting both teams of Thunderbolts under his leadership and gained a level of legitimacy with the CSA, which included the former Thunderbolt Dallas Riordan. He managed to earn further goodwill with the US government when the controversial Superhuman Registration Act was passed, and Zemo registered the Thunderbolts with the federal government's Initiative program. As such, the Thunderbolts soon began undertaking government-sanctioned missions to apprehend unregistered superhumans. Captured villains were then used for Operation Justice Like Lightning, a CSA program designed to conscript an entire army of Thunderbolts into government service. These villains were trained by Zemo and Songbird's unified Thunderbolts, and implanted with teleportation devices that could send them directly into a secure holding facility in the event of disobedience or malfeasance. During the superhero Civil War, the Thunderbolts briefly expanded their primary roster with the addition of Bullseye, Taskmaster, Lady Deathstrike, the Jester, the Jack-O-Lantern, and Venom, and operated under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s purview in their battles against Captain America and his anti-registration Avengers. I should note that this was when the Venom symbiote was not worn by Eddie Brock, but Mac Gargan, who is more famously known as the Scorpion. Meanwhile, the CSA-backed Thunderbolts army included Ajaxus, Aqueduct, Asylum, Batroc the Leaper, 3 new Beetles, Blacklash, Bloodstrike, Boomerang, Bushmaster, Coronary, Death Adder, Dr. Octopus, the Eel, Killer Shrike, King Cobra, Machete, the Mongoose, the Overmind, the Ox, the Porcupine, Pretty Persuasions, Primus, Quicksand, the Rattler, Red Ronin, Slide, Smiling Tiger, Snake Marston, Tatterdemalion, the Texas Twister, the UFOs, the Unicorn, Vermin, Whiplash, Whirlwind, and Zarin the Weapons Master. In the wake of a conflict with the Grandmaster, however, Zemo went missing and was presumed dead, and the Thunderbolts army was disbanded after many of its members fled. Furthermore, the SHIELD-sanctioned team proved to be more reckless than reliable and were similarly discontinued. With the entire Thunderbolts initiative in disarray, the CSA took full control over the whole enterprise, with the goal of using them to capture unregistered heroes. To whip the program back into shape, the CSA tapped the supposedly reformed Norman Osborn, the original Green Goblin, to manage and direct the team. This version of the Thunderbolts included Songbird, a restored Moonstone, the Radioactive Man, newcomer Penance, previously known as Speedball, Venom, and the Swordsman. Osborne also put Bullseye back on the team, however his involvement was kept from the public eye. Meanwhile, Songbird was demoted from her previous leadership position and replaced by the more ruthless Moonstone, although she did eventually wrest back control of the team by conspiring with Doc Samson to blackmail Osborne. Sometime later, however, there was an incident in which heroes and villains alike fought in a massive battle against an invading horde of alien Super Skrulls. At the climax of that conflict, it was Norman Osborn who got the kill shot on the Skrull Queen, and so in the aftermath of the invasion he was regarded by the public as a war hero, allowing him to garner even more political power. As a result, the government-sanctioned Avengers and Initiative programs were placed under the purview of Osborn's Thunderbolts Initiative. Emboldened, Osborne sent Bullseye and Venom to assassinate Songbird, however the Swordsman ultimately helped her fake her death and escape. Osborne also used his position to create a new government-sponsored Avengers team, which included several of the more ruthless Thunderbolts using identities stolen from established heroes. Moonstone became Ms. Marvel, Bullseye became Hawkeye, and Venom became Spider-Man. This Dark Avengers team, as it would be colloquially known, also included returning Avengers Ares and the Sentry, newcomer No-Var, who adopted the name Captain Marvel, Wolverine's son Akihito, who naturally took his father's identity, and Osborn himself, who donned a modified Iron Man suit to become the Iron Patriot. In the midst of all this reshuffling, the Radioactive Man was called back home to China, and the Swordsman was seemingly killed by Osborn after confronting him about his scheming and dealing. The hero-hunting Thunderbolts were officially disbanded, however Osborn soon created a new version of the team to serve as his own personal Black Ops squad. This incarnation of the Thunderbolts included Eric O'Grady, the irredeemable Ant-Man, the Ghost, a corporation-hating fanatic with intangibility powers, the Headsman, an axe-wielding minion that Osborn employed years prior, Paladin, a savvy soldier of fortune whose true identity and origins remain unknown, and Mr. X, a murderous martial artist with low-level telepathy. To lead the team, Osborn seemingly recruited the Black Widow Yelena Belova, whose allegiances and status quo have varied wildly over the years but were especially inconsistent around this time. In truth, however, this was actually Natasha Romanoff, who impersonated Yelena to infiltrate the Thunderbolts and spy on them for Nick Fury, but Osborn was apparently aware of that deception from the beginning and feigned ignorance while using her to test the team's loyalties. In any event, Osborn ultimately replaced her with the cyborg soldier Frank Simpson, who at the time was concealing his identity by adopting the oft-used codename of Scourge, but some of you may know better as the blindly patriotic pill popper Nuke. Subsequent recruits also included the Iron Fist, Danny Rand, who Osborn briefly brainwashed into joining the team, and Max Markham, aka the Grizzly, who despite having superhuman strength, generally failed to gain any respect as a costumed villain. However, that version of the team was disbanded after Osborn's ill-fated siege of Asgard brought his political career to a sudden and ignominious end. After that, Steve Rogers replaced Norman Osborn as the head of national security, and the Thunderbolts program was relaunched in a partnership with the supervillain prison The Raft, in the hopes that more villains could be rehabilitated. This time, the program was put under the supervision of the established hero and Avenger Luke Cage. Founding Thunderbolts Mach 5, Songbird, and Fixer were brought on as project staff, while the Man-Thing was recruited to transport the team using his connection to the Nexus of All Realities in conjunction with technology developed by Hank Pym. John Walker, aka U.S. Agent, was also involved since at the time he was serving as a warden for the raft. The first lineup for this incarnation of the Thunderbolts included the Ghost, Crossbones, Moonstone, and the Juggernaut. Later recruits included a villainous extra-dimensional version of Hyperion, who betrayed the team but was ultimately defeated, and Satana Hellstrom, the Devil's daughter, who offered her occult expertise. Meanwhile, Crossbones and the Juggernaut were both removed from the team at different times due to their unreliability. Not long after all that, Walker and Songbird put together a B-team of Thunderbolts that included Boomerang, Shocker, Centurious, Troll, and Mr. Hyde. Later, there was an incident in which most of the Thunderbolts were lost in the time stream, and a new team of Dark Avengers was recruited to replace them. This group included the monstrous half-arachnid creature Iapek, who became a Dark Spider-Man, June Covington, aka Toxie Doxie, Barney Burton, aka Trickshot, aka Hawkeye's brother, Ragnarok, a cyborg clone of Thor, and Scar, the half-alien son of the Incredible Hulk. Meanwhile, during their journey through the time stream, the Thunderbolts discovered a dystopian future that was unknowingly caused by the machinations of these new Dark Avengers. There, they encountered and ultimately joined forces with a brutal officer known as Boss Cage, who inspired dread while enforcing the law. And in the end, the Thunderbolts returned to their own era in time to stop the Dark Avengers from destroying the future. Not trusting the legal system, the Thunderbolts' newest recruits all went their separate ways after that, with Man-Thing helping them escape from the authorities. Songbird and Mach 5 of course stayed, but this was nonetheless the end for Luke Cage's Thunderbolts team. The next incarnation of the Thunderbolts was largely disconnected from those that had come before and was assembled from scratch by the Red Hulk, aka Thunderbolt Ross. That group was less about reforming supervillains and more about lethal responses to criminal activity, and thus Ross recruited the likes of Deadpool, Elektra, the Punisher, and Agent Venom. Subsequent recruits included Samuel Stearns, aka the Leader, who at the time was also Red, Abigail Wright, aka Mercy, who had a number of psionic powers, including the ability to instantly kill those who believed themselves deserving of death, and the Ghost Rider Johnny Blaze, who of course we've talked about on the channel before. That team completed a number of missions together, but eventually fell apart due to infighting, mutual distrust, and the machinations of the Red Leader. After that, there was an incident in which S.H.I.E.L.D. attempted to use a sentient cosmic cube named Kobik to create a reality-warping prison called Pleasant Hill, in which supervillains were transformed into regular civilians in a seemingly normal American suburb. Suffice it to say, things eventually went sideways and the whole town was ultimately destroyed. In the midst of all of that, Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, who never approved of Pleasant Hill in the first place, rescued Kobik along with the Fixer, Moonstone, Atlas, and Mach X, effectively reassembling a version of the Thunderbolts, which he then led on several missions. While they were later joined by Songbird, the team ultimately disbanded again after a battle with Baron Zemo's forces in which Bucky was captured, Mach X was killed, Kobik disappeared, and the Fixer, Moonstone, and Atlas all left to rejoin the Masters of Evil. Later, after the fall of Hydra's secret empire, Zemo conspired with the then recently elected Mayor Wilson Fisk in a scheme to eliminate the Punisher. To this end, Zemo once again donned the identity of Citizen V and formed a new Thunderbolts team which included the Fixer, Ghost, Moonstone, Radioactive Man, and the Punisher's old enemy, Jigsaw, who concealed his identity from the public. This led to a conflict with the Punisher and his allies, including Night Thrasher, Ghost Rider, the Black Widow, and Moon Knight. Suffice it to say, Zemo's Thunderbolts were disbanded after failing to complete their task. Fisk later assembled his own Thunderbolts team during the King in Black event, in which Earth was attacked by the primordial god of symbiotes, Null. Led by Taskmaster, this squad included Mr. Fear, Batroc the Leaper, Star, and the Rhino. There were also two inexperienced new villains, Ampere and Snakehead, both of whom were killed almost immediately. After the King in Black crisis was over, Fisk began cracking down on vigilante activity in New York, effectively outlawing any superheroes that weren't government agents. Furthermore, he greatly expanded his Thunderbolts program, recruiting and deputizing numerous supervillains in his war against the likes of Spider-Man and Daredevil. This included Doc Ock, Shocker, Whiplash, Electro, Agony, the Abomination, and more. John Walker, U.S. agent, also signed up to spy on Fisk for the district attorney. However, Fisk later used power stolen from Kilgrave the Purple Man to ensure Walker's loyalty. After Fisk was later removed from office and Luke Cage was elected mayor, Cage gained authority over the Thunderbolts initiative and once again sought to redeem the name. To this end, he employed a PR specialist named Helen Astrantia, who managed the project and worked to cultivate an improved public image. Naturally, the unrepentant villains were out, and Hawkeye was brought in to lead a new team, which included America Chavez, Kara Kilgrave, aka Persuasion, an enigmatic newcomer named Guts and Glory, and the young Power Man, Victor Alvarez. That group was subsequently joined by the diminutive Monster Island inhabitant Egro the Unbreakable, who became something of a team mascot, and Monica Rambeau, known at the time as Spectrum, who was actually Mayor Cage's first choice for team leader, but turned the position down. This version of the team had a few adventures, but failed to justify their budget and haven't been particularly active since then. Meanwhile, Bucky Barnes, known at the time as The Revelation, partnered with the noted spy Contessa Valentina Allegra de la Fontaine, or at least a life model decoy of her, and formed a completely separate Thunderbolts team with the goal of eliminating high-profile targets, starting with the Red Skull. This version of the team included the Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, the White Widow, Yelena Belova, the Red Guardian, Alexei Shostakov, the Master of Kung Fu, Shang-Chi, the Destroyer, Sharon Carter, and the U.S. Agent, John Walker. Later, when Dr. Doom gained the power of Sorcerer Supreme and became the Emperor of Earth, Bucky also recruited his old ally, the World War II-era Ghost Rider, Sal Romera, and joined forces with a pair of Wakandans named Io and Aneka, also known as the Midnight Angels. At the same time, Doom formed his own team of Thunderbolts, which were led by the real Valentina de Fontaine, who had adopted the Citizen V identity. This group included the Fixer, Moonstone, Atlas, and Mach Doom, a robot meant to impersonate and take the place of the deceased Mach X. That Thunderbolts team clashed with Bucky's, but they haven't been seen since Doom's reign came to an end. Bucky's group also disbanded, and the next time he assembled a team of heroes, they were ultimately dubbed the New Avengers, leaving the Thunderbolts name unused once again. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before someone picks it up again, but that's all I've got for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this weekend, so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!